Hello, Windward, and welcome to the Pencils Down podcast. In service of our mission to remediate our students' language-based learning disabilities, we take every instructional moment seriously, and we work to be intentional in everything that we do. This podcast is an opportunity for Jamie Williamson, our head of school, to have an informal series of unscripted conversations with different members of our community about who they are, what they care about, and what the Windward School means to them. And so, we're putting our pencils down, we're closing up our computers, and we're looking forward to sharing with you another conversation today.
Well, welcome to the second episode of the Pencils Down podcast. My name is Jamie Williamson. I'm the head of school here, and I'm very, very excited to interview today Alexis Pochna, who is the director of the Windward Institute. And for those of you who maybe didn't have a chance to pop into our first episode, this is really the Pencils Down podcast is really about having deep and intimate conversations and also kind of unscripted moments with some incredible professionals within our community. And if you haven't had a chance to go back and listen to our first episode with Lisa Murray, I would highly recommend you do that. But today, I'm actually really excited to spend some time with Alexis Pochna, who runs our Windward Institute, but also has had just a really great kind of arc of your career here. We're going to talk about that in a moment. But as we start, part of our process here, I like to kind of start with a little bit of gratitude. If you would give me a moment to kind of share some things.
Sure.
So this is year 6 of getting a chance to work and grow alongside of you, Alexis. And I have to tell you, I am so incredibly grateful for what you're bringing to the WI right now. I think that your transition into this space has just really been wonderful. I think the way you're showing up with such a thoughtful, reflective process and really thinking about the impact that we can have in the work. How do we think about sustainability long term? It's just been a pleasure to watch you kind of grow into this new role, and I'm just excited to see where the WI gets to head over the next few years. So thank you so much for all the great work that you've been doing. So.
It's honestly my pleasure. It's an honor. The Windward Institute is doing amazing work, so It's really a privilege.
And I'm actually really excited to share a little more of that work today with our community, both our faculty and staff, but also our families as well. And so you've had, what is this year 17 or 18 for you? Sorry to shortchange you.
I think this is 19.
19. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Sorry to pull a year from you here. So 19 years.
I'm not really counting.
Okay. We'll get you to the platinum circle soon enough, right?
Soon.
To the 20 year, that really kind of rarefied air of the 20-year experiences here at Windward. But as we start the conversation today, because I think you've had such a wonderful arc to the journey here. You've occupied what feels like almost every seat, kind of role in the organization. So if you would talk a little about your journey here, and I'll ask a follow-up from that. So
Okay, great. Well, I started at Windward as an assistant teacher for Pat Gay, which was incredible. Yeah. Hi, Pat.
Yeah.
And then I moved into teaching and was a language arts and social studies teacher. And I love to tell the story of my very first language arts class here. I had all new students, and it was amazing to see their transformation over the course of the year and what Windward brought to their families and how much it changed their lives. And that kind of, I was already hooked my first year, but that kind of firmly cemented me with the program. And then, so I taught for several years, and then I started to transition into leadership first as the assistant teacher staff developer, which was a really wonderful experience working with our new teachers and helping them kind of navigate the training program that was shepherded by Sandy Schwartz, and just an amazing program. So that was wonderful. And then from there, I transitioned into the language arts department and continued to mentor teachers there, develop curriculum, and really dive deeply into the nuts and bolts of our program.
Yeah.
I love our language arts program. So I do remember my very first day as a language arts coordinator. I remember standing though in the doorway of my office, and all the children were coming in the first day of school, and the tears just started to go, because I thought, I'm not going to have students. So that was a bit of a transition, but then you navigate your way back to them, which ultimately led me to school building leadership and being an assistant division head and then the campus head of Westchester Lower School, which was 10 years of day-to-day operations at Westchester Lower School, working with teachers and the children and the families. That was an amazing decade of my life. I think it really changed me as a person for the better. And, being kind of the full Windward person, I was really excited about the opportunity to transition to the Windward Institute and help kind of continue to increase the school's impact, because I really believe in our program. I really believe in the work we do. And, we want to make it more accessible. The information and knowledge we have, we want to share it with more people.
I want to take a moment to really kind of like honor that journey. Like, what an incredible journey within the kind of context of the work that we do here. From classroom teacher, I love the idea of if you're in a leadership role in an independent school, having a chance to actually be a building level leader, because I think you start to see things a little bit differently. You get to see a little bit more of the whole, the kind of the full gestalt of a program, which I think is really important. But you also got to lead the Westchester Lower School through a really important transition. I like how you just kind of like, I think that both of us probably repress a little bit of that sort of trauma of leading through the pandemic and opening up the campus that we currently set in today, which is the new Westchester Lower School, the John J. Russell campus. And it was like a really hard time to be the head of a campus. When we had come into that fall, I think we'd sat down pretty early on in the spring, and we were trying to figure out like how we were going to get that building back open, the 13 Windward building. And the classrooms there, I love that building so much. It was such a wonderful, like, homey space, but with a lot of really irregularly shaped classrooms. Some of these long, kind of narrow, shotgun-y sort of like spaces.
They had their charm.
They have their charm, right? And when you're like not in a pandemic, like, it was a wonderful space for us. But to kind of get this building open was such a heavy lift. And I know I've thanked you for this like hundreds of times, but I just want to like take a moment to say thank you so much for your partnership during that really, really, really stressful period. I think we all had to dig in to learn incredible levels of flexibility that we did not know existed in the context of our community and work. But I really thought you handled that with such style, such grace. And I really appreciated your like willingness to kind of lean into the ambiguity of all that and really put our kids first. And so it was a pleasure to work on this project with you. So thank you so much for that. I think
I appreciate that.
A really important mark to leave on the
organization. What a building we have. I love just seeing the children in the space and the teachers in the space, and it's a really remarkable building. And I really appreciated your leadership at that time. I think it was hard to think flexibly at first, I mean, what we had was working incredibly well, and it was hard to, finagle a little bit and make it work. But once we kind of all leaned in, it was amazing what we were able to accomplish through collaboration. And I think it also just speaks to our community as a whole.
I would agree.
The level of commitment that everybody here has, to our kids and to our kids during the pandemic, and making sure that learning continued no matter what. It's an amazing team we have.
And I just have so many memories of walking around this building, tape measure in hand, talking about parking, talking about lunch, talking about dismissal. But just thank you so much for that. You've had, and I think you had a little bit of a life before you showed up on Windward's doorstep as an assistant teacher prior to that work. And my guess is, even 19 years ago, you're such an incredibly bright human being. My guess is you had a lot of things in the world that you could be doing. And I'd love to get a sense of what really kind of brought you into the space. Like what kind of prompted you to kind of be part of our community and join this incredible effort?
Well, I had heard wonderful things about Windward. I actually have a family member who attended Windward, and my husband's cousin. And it was just life-changing for him. His mother actually was a learning specialist who had taken the trainings at Windward, knew Windward really well. And so Rhodes started to lead me to Windward. And when I first started here, at first I thought, wow, this is so different from anything that I had seen before. And I was concerned about my ability to kind of catch on and get it. And then once the pieces started to fall into place, I just thought, why doesn't everybody have access to this? Honestly, it just made so much sense. The kids, all the learning was so accessible to them. It was very empowering for teachers to be able to feel like my kids are getting it. I'm delivering material, they're growing, they're learning. And so I was sold very quickly. And I think having been in other settings, I was able to really appreciate the value of what we have here.
Yeah, thank you. I so appreciate that. You know, and as you talked about your journey, you know, one of the things I've talked about, we touched on it in my last conversation with Lisa, is this notion of like moving into leadership. Sometimes when you work in any space, and I'm going to own this as a challenge that I sort of had early on, is I always like kept waiting for someone to kind of like give me permission almost to lead in a space, because I didn't want to step on anybody's toes. I didn't want to like, you know, all that. And so like, and there's times when people, you know, are really actively raising their hand saying, I want to grow, I want to learn, and I want to be able to do that. And I think it's kind of incumbent upon us as leaders to really think about how do we kind of create space for that. So what caused you to want to raise your hand and lean into more of a leadership, kind of coming out of the classroom and kind of moving into a little bit different space within schools? Like what really prompted that, or who nudged you in that direction?
Well, I think it's sort of a matter of sort of circles of impact, I guess, and wanting to grow the impact that I was having. I you know, started my career in education totally committed to working with kids and to really moving the dial for them, you know, and making them, you know, helping them grow into the adults that, you know, they were meant to be in terms of their learning and knowledge. And so, you know, I saw opportunities, I think, to grow my impact over time. And it inspired me to keep growing, I guess. And I'm a lifelong learner. So I also liked sort of having the opportunity to pursue new growth areas for myself and to continue growing. Yeah,
that's wonderful. That's really wonderful. You know, you kind of touched down on, I think, a really important word that I'd love to kind of maybe, you know, kind of poke at it just a little bit here. It's the word of impact, and this idea of systems. This is October, which is, we're having you on as a guest, not as an accidental sort of timing. So this is actually Dyslexia Awareness Month. So there's a lot happening, and I'm thinking about the great work that the WI is doing, and really thinking about that push for impact in our community. And we, again, you know, I think when you're part of a community like this, I think it's really important for us to think about the kids we have in our building as, you know, getting the best work they can possibly get. But I also think there's some real responsibility on schools like this to really make sure that we're sort of, one, keeping the door open for kids who need our help and help find their way here, who aren't being served right now, but also, two, to think about how do we help education in general? How do we start to reset the table for others and train teachers? And from a WI perspective, that is really such an important part of that role. So seeing you as this systems level thinker, the idea of sort of expanding your sort of circles of influence and impact as you kind of move through your career, I just think this is like such the right spot for you, you know, and sort of kind of that intersectionality. But I'd love it if you could, because I think for folks because with WI, we started in 2019. It was officially launched. We had been doing this work in a myriad of other ways. So while there was no officially a WI at that point, this is not new work for us. We've been training teachers in the greater New York area for a really long time. And I loved when I came up here, just about every educator I spoke with in the greater New York area either had attended a class here or had a colleague who attended a class here and just could not rave enough about the work that happened with our writing program, with our reading program, multisensory reading instruction, all that great work that we've been doing forever. So if you could maybe like ground us a little bit in like the why behind the Windward Institute. Why is that work so important and connected to our mission from your vantage point?
Well, I think, of course, obviously our mission first and foremost, right, is to our students within the school and to remediate their language-based learning disability and set them on a path to returning to a mainstream setting. But if you continue reading our mission statement, it goes into making sure that our students and that students elsewhere have access to highly trained teachers, and that the Windward Institute is sharing its experience and knowledge with the broader parent community, the broader local community, but also the much larger community, which consists of advocates, educators, parents. It just goes on and on. I think as a society, we all care about education. We might not necessarily always agree on exactly how to get from A to Z, but I think it's important to everybody.
Yeah, I would agree. And I love the work that's happening, and you have a lot of irons in the proverbial fire right now when it comes to projects that the WI is working on. And so as you think about, I'm just hearing so many connections to, as you talked about your kind of personal, when I hear some values in there, this idea of impact, maybe. I don't know if you identify that as one of your top two values.
It's definitely one of my values.
So do you have so when you think about your current sort of set of core values, is there two that you kind of can lift up as when I really kind of push on these two, this is the two that really I always come back to?
Well, that's a great question. And I know we've discussed this at other meetings because 2 is a very small number, Jamie.
It is. It's a very hard number to kind of push on.
I feel like I have a lot of values. I want to keep my Windward hat on for the podcast because, of course, my family is my North Star.
Yeah.
And, that will always be the case. But in terms of my professional life, absolutely, I think that impact is one of my core values, without a doubt. And, with that, aligned with that, right, is kind of service to others, making a difference. There are several ways that you can frame that. And then I think another, which speaks part of the reason why I love being at the WI, is curiosity and learning. I love learning, and I have 3 master's degrees. I couldn't stop going to school. So that's something that part of the Windward Institute job is a lot of learning about what the current research is, what advances have been made in education so that we can help translate that information to all of our folks at Windward, our teachers, our families. So I'm constantly learning. So I would say curiosity is also a real driving force for me.
I can see those things really kind of coming together for you. And in my role as the head of school, but also the executive director of the Windward Institute, it's been wonderful to see as we've engaged projects or various things that we're trying to kind of accomplish, how deep and what a learning stance you get into, and how deep you go into the kind of the content and the curiosity. So I see that alive and well. So I really appreciate that as a value from a value perspective. I think one of the things I'd love for you to kind of maybe reflect on is, we have a lot of things that we could do. We've actually started some really fun, I think, sort of kind of community-facing kind of initiatives over the last couple of years. Maybe talk about a couple of the big projects or priorities that you're kind of working on in the WI right now that folks may not have as much of a window to.
Okay, absolutely. Well, I think there are sort of the larger buckets, right, of how we are educating our community, whether it be teachers, parents, literacy enthusiasts. So I think that education piece is a big factor for us with our mission to increase childhood literacy rates. And honestly, there's a lot to learn. We have so much knowledge about how to teach children how to read, how to remediate dyslexia and other language-based learning disabilities. And it's a great frustration, I think, for all of us at the Windward community that there isn't greater access to it for students locally, nationally, globally. Within that category, We're always working on refining our content for teacher training at the Institute, which is very well attended by Windward faculty. I don't know if all of our families know that our Windward faculty take our courses, and that's really important to us, and we love seeing our colleagues in our courses. But then also we do community-facing webinars, lectures, and so on to really bring researchers to the forefront for the larger community and for our families. And we do also host Windward family specific webinars that are very specific to our community, to our academic program, and so on.
Yeah.
So that's kind of teacher training. I would also say we're also really looking at how to leverage technology more fully right now in the universe in which we live, to make sure that we're offering really cutting edge teacher training to folks, accessing our learning management systems and so on. Then we also have outreach initiatives to help with direct service to students and families, and to really kind of grow the work boots on the ground.
Yeah.
So we have a free reading screening initiative that is made possible by the Early Literacy Endowment. And we launched that through the Windward Institute last year in the spring.
Yeah.
And we'll have now 3 reading screenings this year that are slated for the New York Public Library, the New Rochelle Public Library, and the Yonkers Public Library. We've been literally overrun with faculty and staff who are in support of this initiative and who are willing to help us with this, which is incredible, because they screen the children, they work with the families. When we hosted the event in Yonkers in the spring, being able to have those conversations with families to help them sort of understand where their child is in terms of reading and how to navigate the road ahead, what they have access to and how to access those resources is incredibly meaningful to us and so important to our work. We also are partnered with the Promise Clinic and the Promise Project at Columbia, and we have a number of Windward teachers who tutor through that program to help students who have been identified by Promise in under-resourced communities, which has been incredibly impactful. We have a Saturday school program where we're able to share some of our study skills program with students in the larger community. So we're really excited about that also.
That's great. I think seeing how the free reading screening program has grown over the last couple of years, and we're talking to Beth Voltman, who is our Director of Enrollment Management, about, during post-pandemic, recognizing that there were so many families who were getting a front row seat into their children's education via Zoom, in the bedroom or office or at the
Myself
kitchen table.
Included.
But the narrative was, I think parents were seeing, one, not a great deal of quality instruction. I think parents were seeing where kids were struggling, and parents were seeing how much frustration I think sometimes at times that their kids were experiencing in the day-to-day learning. And I think the narrative was, it's going to be fine. They're going to be okay. It's just pandemic loss, no big deal. We'll get back at it. And the research has really shown that we've had almost 2-year gain in reading kind of erased during the pandemic. And I think we had a lot of teachers not being able to have clear lines of sight for where kids were progressing or weren't progressing due to the virtual environment, not due to anything other than it's hard to see on the other side of a Zoom screen what kids are actually doing. And so we brought that idea of expanding some screening in our community. We started this virtually. And I'm so grateful to the team as how they've really ran with this and pushed. And we've got now a nice endowed fund to help kind of support this work in perpetuity. And being at the first one at the Yonkers Public Library on the waterfront there last year was really a beautiful moment. We had so many families there who were just in tears because they had not had somebody really shoot them straight in terms of where their kids are and what was happening with their kids' learning, and then offering some resources both in English and Spanish, as part of our endowed gift. It was really a wonderful thing to see this finally come to this big fruition. So thank you for your efforts to continue to carry and expand that program. I think it's going to be a wonderful thing for our community. And a really wonderful thing for kids and families. So really positive, some really great stuff there. We also have been working with the Haskins Lab up at the Yale Child Studies Center, which has been a really interesting kind of push into a little bit of kind of base science and looking at how the work that we do here in the Windward classroom, how that potentially impacts neurology over time. And so it's been fun to see our research associate from Haskins and Yale come down and spend some time putting the EEG caps on kids and looking on the behavioral measures to kind of see, does our work impact neurology over time, and how could that help us in the future to kind of whether identify some kind of low responders to program or to really kind of solidify the importance of multisensory approach. A lot of really, really wonderful stuff there.
And I'm hoping that we're going to get Nicole Landy back soon, who's the principal investigator on the research study, to share some more findings with our community.
Yeah.
She was here 2 years ago to share some initial findings, but it is a longitudinal study, which is incredibly significant. We don't have as much access to longitudinal studies as we would like in the scientific community. And so, every couple of years, right, they're amassing even more data. So keep an eye out.
Yeah.
She'll be back.
I think so, and I'm excited. I'm so glad you mentioned Nicole and some of the research perspective, because a big part of this work, and you talked about this earlier, was some of the lectures that we have in our community. And so twice a year for our fall lecture and then our Schwartz lecture in the spring, we bring, I think, a really incredibly renowned researcher to the table to have a conversation with our community. Do you want to talk a bit about who we have? I think we're both really excited about
I would love to.
do a little plug. Feel free to plug away.
A wonderful, wonderful friend of the Windward School and Windward Institute, Dr. Katie Pace-Miles. She will be our fall community lecturer. We are delighted about that. She is a professor at Brooklyn College and has done such an amazing job in the literacy space in terms of helping to bridge the gap between what the needs are in the classroom and what higher ed can do. And how they can collaborate more closely with schools. She also, is just a brilliant literacy expert who's done quite a bit on orthographic mapping. She will be presenting on really kind of how we can transform literacy through 3 sort of key buckets, one of which is early identification, one of which is teacher training, and then, of course, one is interventions. All 3 areas that are near and dear to our heart here at Windward.
Yeah, I think she is one. I think she does such incredible work on the teacher training front, and her practicum work that she's done with to kind of create that program over there to really give some pre-service teachers some actual, like, deeply important kind of foundational kind of in kind of on the job training work and allow them to kind of get in and do some great work with kids and then get some feedback in that process, which I think is just wonderful. So I'm excited to have her come. Every time we have a conversation with Katie, I get really excited about the work that she's doing. We also have a Lead on Read podcast episode where we interviewed her. I think she was our first in-person interview. The first Lead on Read in-person interview that we had done in that. So when Danielle and I interviewed her in Manhattan, so it was really great to see her in person for that. You do so much for Windward, and I think that you are someone who shows up whenever there's someone else needs some help, and you're always willing to kind of throw in and volunteer and sort of like add your area of expertise to the kind of the mix of resource whenever we've got something going on, and I deeply appreciate that. I want to sort of shift gears a little bit because you are a whole person. You show up and I so appreciate that you mentioned your family in this one, because I know that about you, that your family is such an important part of the work that you do. And I also know that you work really hard to make sure you're also taking care of yourself. So what kind of ask a fun question here? Like, what's a really important kind of non-negotiable act of self-care that you as a human being like to kind of engage in?
Oh, well, I do eat healthily. So that's really important to me. I'm a very green food oriented individual. So I like to have a refrigerator full of vegetables. So I would say that's a healthcare piece for me. And taking time for myself, you know, whatever it might be. My husband and I are big hikers, so we'll go hiking, reading, whatever it is that just feels like I'm taking time for myself, making a little space.
Yeah, I think it's good for all of us to do. I think it's sometimes in the busy throes of like your day-to-day, kind of work, it's easy to forget to like eat well. It's also easy to forget to like take good care of yourself and sort of engage in some things. And I'm a big fan of like sneaking out into nature. So I'm glad you do a little bit of that. You mentioned reading a little bit because I think that I love how we've got so many readers in our community, people who just really love books. Whether that's, I'm a big fan of like whenever I run into a book in our language arts program for our 6th through like 9th grade, I'm quick to borrow a copy, take it home, swallow that as quickly as I can get it.
We have some really wonderful books in our curriculum.
We really
do. I mean, and as a teacher, you get very attached to teaching your books. I have to tell you. So I actually had on a parent recommendation that was her daughter's favorite book, and my last one I read for our language arts program was The War That Saved Me. Was just a lovely little book about World War II and the kind of the kids being pushed out on trains out of the country from London to kind of get away from the center where the war was about to was where the war was about to happen. And so it was an interesting story about a girl with a club foot and the experience she had out there. So it was just a lovely, lovely book. But so what do you like to read? What's on your, maybe I'll ask a more specific question. What's on your nightstand right now that you are sort of like reading and kind of indulging in a little bit of, I hope it's not a workbook, like a work-related book. I do. I do have to, that's part of the joy of the Windward Institute, I have to be honest. I mean, whenever people come to my office, they can see that I've amassed more books than the last time they were there because I have quite a professional library that is really one of my prized possessions, quite honestly. I love all my professional books, and I do read a lot of research, but it is a proverbial nightstand because I read everything actually on a tablet because I like to make the font really large. I really enjoy that. I like sort of playing with the color, the sepia tones. But right now I'm reading a book. It's called Dinosaurs. Dinosaurs, a novel. It's by Lydia Millett, but I'm a huge fan of another book that she wrote called A Children's Bible, which is, I don't know if you ever heard of it. It came out, 3 or 4 years ago. And it's quite the short dystopian read of families that go on vacation together, and the kids are all there on the vacation, and suddenly they're faced basically with the apocalypse.
Oh my gosh.
But it's not as dire as it sounds. She's an amazing writer, and so the Dinosaurs book that I'm reading is really kind of more of an author's craft type of a book, because it's a very simple plot, but it's almost like, I don't know, it's just like being a bird kind of flying over farms and everything else. You're sort of wisping your way through this story of someone who relocates from New York to Arizona and moves across the street from a family who lives in a glass house and becomes a voyeur who then, befriends this family, and how this changes his life, and acts of kindness and community and things like that. But it's so beautifully written. I'm just really enjoying it.
Yeah,
it's a nice escape.
Loved your description of that. It's fantastic. I'm gonna have to. I made a little note that might be on my next on my list here. I'm always looking for a good book. So, is there anything that like you're wishing I had asked that I had not asked yet? I'll kind of throw that kind of question on the table as we kind of wrap up our episode here.
Well, no, I think we talked about a lot of things. I think I guess I would add, because this is a Windward community podcast. Yay for the Windward community, everybody out there, teachers, students, families. I love the idea of this podcast. I thank you very much for inviting me to participate.
You're very welcome.
I think, I obviously have gotten to know many of the people who I'm sure you will host over the course of this podcast, but we do have an amazing community here, and I think it's really nice to be able to pull the curtain and open the door and get to know people a little bit more. So, and for anyone out there who is interested in the work of the WI and maybe doesn't know it that well, feel free to email me. Feel free to call. The more the merrier.
We also have an entire web page or an entire website or section of our website dedicated to the WI and all the classes and resources that we have.
That we do.
So it's on our homepage. You'll see the little link for the Windward Institute. I just want to say thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate it. I am just in awe of the great work that you're doing, with the enthusiasm you're bringing to this work. With the thoughtfulness with which you're approaching how to kind of like really tackle each of these problems as we and sort of projects as we move through this. I think you have brought such a breadth of like insight and reflectiveness, but also this kind of driven, like we have to do some good work for our community. And I'm actually really excited that folks got to learn a little bit more about the work you're doing in this kind of newish, we can't call you new anymore. So the bloom is off the rose when it comes to that, because you've been in the trenches here for a little bit on this role. But I really appreciate everything you've done to help bring a little structure to that and some really great leadership to the WI, and really help us expand the footprint and the impact that we get to have in our community on a day-to-day basis. So thank you so much.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you.
No, absolutely. And I, over the next few months, as we kind of think about some folks to interview, my guess is we'll have at least one more episode dedicated to the WI in the next year or so, because we don't want to not continue to tell that story.
Great.
So. And again, I want to say thank you to everybody for listening on the Pencils Down podcast. And if you have any ideas about sort of guests or people that you'd really like us to focus on in the future, feel free to drop me an email. You can find that on the website. But we'd love to hear from you and really appreciate you tuning in, and look forward to a few more of these. So thank you. Have a great day.
Bye, everyone.